I'm Catherine Reynolds, 58, and I just wanted peace after burying my husband Robert 6 months ago. Our mountain retreat in Colorado seemed the perfect escape from New York's chaos. After a 5-hour flight and 2-hour drive through winding roads, I finally arrived at our secluded cabin. But something was wrong. Lights blazed through windows. Unfamiliar cars crowded the driveway. As I pushed open my own front door, I froze. There stood Melissa, my daughter-in-law, surrounded by strangers who looked completely at home in my house. Before I dive into this nightmare that nearly cost me everything, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever had family betray your trust, and subscribe to join me for more true stories of survival and resilience. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I fought back when my own family tried to destroy me. For several seconds, I stood frozen in the doorway of my own home, keys still in hand, as 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The silence was deafening. "Catherine," Melissa's voice broke the tension with false brightness. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." My daughter-in-law approached with arms outstretched as if for a hug, but I remained rooted to the spot. My mind raced. The last time I'd seen Melissa had been at Robert's funeral. She and my son James lived in Denver, about 3 hours away. We maintained a cordial relationship, though never particularly close. Now, here she stood in my living room, acting as if I was the unexpected visitor. "What are you doing in my house?" I finally managed, stepping back from her attempted embrace. Melissa's smile faltered slightly before returning with renewed force. "James didn't tell you? He said we could use the place for a while. Let me introduce you to everyone." She gestured to an older woman with highlighted blonde hair and calculating eyes who was rising from my favorite armchair. "This is my mother, Sandra." The woman approached with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "How lovely to finally meet you, Catherine. Melissa has told us so much about you," Sandra said, her tone dripping with insincere warmth. Something about her immediately set off warning bells in my mind. Next came a tall, muscular man in his 30s with the same nose as Melissa. My brother, Ethan. He merely nodded, his expression assessing me like I was an unexpected obstacle rather than the owner of the property he was occupying. "And this is my sister, Brooke." A younger woman with Melissa's features offered a tight smile. "We're so grateful for your hospitality." Hospitality? I hadn't offered any hospitality. This was my home that I hadn't visited in nearly 2 years, not since Robert's diagnosis had made travel difficult. "I don't understand," I said firmly. "James has no authority to offer this house to anyone. This property belongs to me." An uncomfortable silence fell. Melissa and Sandra exchanged a quick glance. "Perhaps we should sit down," Sandra suggested, gesturing to the sofa. My sofa, as if offering me a seat in my own home. Reluctantly, I sat, noticing immediately how the furniture had been rearranged. Family photos that had adorned the mantel were missing. Instead, unfamiliar decorative items cluttered the surfaces. "How long have you been here?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. Melissa perched on the arm of a chair. "About 3 months now." 3 months? I couldn't hide my shock. "Yes, we had some issues with our house renovation," Sandra interjected smoothly. "James so generously offered this place since it was sitting empty. He said you rarely use it anymore." My hands clenched into fists on my lap. James had no right to make that offer. This is my property. I'm the sole owner since Robert passed. Another meaningful glance passed between Melissa and her mother. "We understand you've been through a difficult time," Sandra said with a patronizing tone that made my blood boil. "Grief can be so confusing. Perhaps you and James had discussions about the house that you've forgotten?" I stared at her, incredulous. "I've had no such discussions, and my memory is perfectly intact." "Of course," Sandra backpedaled, though her expression suggested otherwise. "We just want to avoid any misunderstandings." Ethan had remained standing, arms crossed, his presence somehow menacing despite his silence. Brooke had busied herself on her phone, though I caught her watching me from beneath lowered lashes. "Where are my things?" I asked, noticing more and more missing items as I looked around. "My photographs? Robert's books?" "We just put them away for safekeeping," Melissa said quickly. "We can get them out tomorrow." I stood up. "This situation is unacceptable. I came here for some peace and quiet. I expect you all to make arrangements to leave." Melissa's face crumpled into an expression of hurt that seemed rehearsed. But we have nowhere else to go right now. Our house is uninhabitable with the renovations. That's not my problem, I said firmly. This is my home, not a hotel. Sandra stepped forward, her voice soothing but with an edge. Catherine, it's getting late. Why don't we all get some rest and discuss this tomorrow when everyone's fresher? You must be tired from your journey. I was exhausted, and the confrontation had drained what little energy I had left. Fine. I'll take the master bedroom. Another uncomfortable pause. Actually, Melissa said hesitantly, we've set up in there. But the guest room is all made up. It's very comfortable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to stay in the guest room of my own house? Just for tonight, Sandra placated. We can figure everything out tomorrow. Too tired to argue further, I reluctantly agreed, dragging my suitcase to what was now apparently my room. The space had been stripped of personality, with none of the touches Robert and I had carefully chosen. I sat heavily on the unfamiliar bedspread, trying to make sense of the situation. Later that night, as I ventured to the kitchen for a glass of water, I overheard hushed voices from the living room. Can't just show up and expect us to leave, Melissa was saying. Don't worry, Sandra's voice replied. She's clearly confused. We'll handle the situation according to the plan. Just keep James on your side, and everything will work out perfectly. I retreated silently to my room, a chill running down my spine. What exactly was their plan, and what did it have to do with me? I slept fitfully that night, dreams haunted by intruders in my home and faceless figures rummaging through my belongings. Morning light filtering through unfamiliar curtains momentarily disoriented me before the previous day's events came rushing back. This wasn't a nightmare, it was reality. When I opened the guest room closet to hang up some clothes, I discovered boxes of my personal possessions haphazardly shoved inside. Photo albums from when James was a child, Robert's collection of vintage watches, my cashmere sweaters, now wrinkled and crushed beneath heavier items. Anger replacing shock, I showered quickly and dressed, determined to get answers. In the kitchen, I found Sandra preparing coffee as if she owned the place. Good morning, Catherine, she chirped with false cheer. Did you sleep well? No, I didn't, I replied coldly. I found my personal belongings stuffed in boxes in the closet. Sandra's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes hardened. Melissa mentioned you might be upset about the rearrangements. We had to make room for everyone. You understand. Coffee? This isn't about coffee, Sandra. This is about you and your family taking over my home without permission. She sighed dramatically. Catherine, I think you're being unnecessarily combative. We're all family here. We are not family. You are my daughter-in-law's relatives. Nothing more. And I need to speak with my son immediately. I pulled out my phone and dialed James. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice guarded. Mom, is everything okay? No, James, everything is not okay. I arrived at the mountain house yesterday to find Melissa's entire family living here. They claim you told them they could stay. Is that true? There was a long pause. I told Melissa her family could use the place for a weekend when they were between houses. That was months ago. A weekend? I repeated incredulously. They've been here for 3 months, James. 3 months? He sounded genuinely surprised. That can't be right. It is right. They've moved in, rearranged everything, packed away our family photos. They've taken over. James. Sandra hovered nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop but clearly hanging on every word. Mom, I'm sure there's just been a misunderstanding. Melissa wouldn't. This isn't about what Melissa would or wouldn't do. I cut him off. This is about our property that you had no right to offer to anyone. I know, he said, sounding uncomfortable. Look, I'll talk to Melissa and sort this out. You'd better, I said firmly. Because something strange is going on here. After hanging up, I began taking inventory of the house. The more I looked, the more alarmed I became. In the study, I discovered Robert's antique chess set was missing a valuable collector's item his grandfather had given him. The silver frame holding our wedding photo had vanished from the mantel. My heart sank when I realized my mother's pearl necklace was no longer in the jewelry box I'd left in the master bedroom. I confronted Melissa, who'd finally emerged from my bedroom looking perfectly at ease. "Where is Robert's chess set? And my mother's pearls?" Her expression flashed with something guilt, annoyance, before settling into concern. "Oh, those valuables? We moved them into the safe for protection. I'll get them for you later. I want to see them now. I don't have the combination with me. Ethan changed it for security reasons." "Security reasons? It's my safe." She frowned. "Catherine, I understand you're upset, but there's no need to raise your voice." As we argued, I noticed Brooke slipping into the study. Following her, I caught her hastily replacing a folder in the desk drawer, a drawer containing our financial documents. "What are you doing with those papers?" I demanded. Brooke startled. "Just tidying up. Things were so disorganized." "Those are private financial documents." "I was just putting them away," she insisted. But her flushed face told a different story. By afternoon, the pattern was clear. Every time I asked about missing items, I received vague excuses. Whenever I insisted on answers, someone would deflect or suggest I was being unreasonable. Ethan's presence grew increasingly menacing. He'd position himself in doorways as I passed, forcing me to brush against him to get by. When I demanded they return my property to its original state, he stepped closer than necessary. "We've made this place livable," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You should be thanking us." "I want all of you out of here within 48 hours, I stated firmly, "or I'm calling the police." This declaration caused an immediate reaction. Melissa burst into tears. Sandra comforted her while glaring daggers at me. Brooke nervously bit her lip, and Ethan's expression darkened dangerously. "Mom!" Melissa sobbed. "How could you do this? You know we have nowhere to go. You've always hated me, and now you want to destroy my family." "That's not true," I began, but Sandra cut me off. "Catherine, I think you need to reconsider this hostile approach. Melissa is family. Your grandchild will be family." "Grandchild?" I repeated, momentarily confused. "Oh," Sandra said with faux innocence, "hasn't she told you? Melissa is expecting." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Was Melissa pregnant, or was this another manipulation? While I processed this information, Melissa continued her theatrical sobbing. "I just wanted our families to be close. I thought you'd be happy we were taking care of your house." Her performance was so convincing that for a moment, I second-guessed myself. Was I overreacting? But then I remembered the missing valuables, the financial papers being examined, the whispered conversation about the plan. "My decision stands," I said firmly. 48 hours. That night, after another tense dinner where I picked at my food while everyone else ate as if nothing was wrong, I decided to check my car. Something about Ethan's smirk as I mentioned driving to town tomorrow made me suspicious. I was right to worry. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw all 4 tires had been slashed. Standing alone in the dark driveway, miles from town, I realized just how vulnerable I truly was. The next morning, I called the local sheriff's office, requesting assistance with unwanted occupants in my home. The dispatcher's response caught me off guard. "Mrs. Reynolds? Let me check." "Yes, we have a note here regarding your property. Your daughter-in-law contacted us last week." My stomach dropped. "What did she say?" There was an uncomfortable pause. "Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but she expressed concerns about your well-being. She mentioned your son James has given them permission to occupy the residence while they assist with your care." "My care?" I repeated incredulously. "I don't need care. These people are trespassing in my home." "I understand this is frustrating," the dispatcher said cautiously. "According to our notes, your son was concerned about early signs of cognitive issues following your husband's passing." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "They told you I have dementia? That's absolutely false." "Ma'am, I'm not making any judgments. I can send an officer out for a welfare check if you'd like." "Yes, please do," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. After hanging up, I immediately called Daniel Hoffman, my attorney in New York. He listened attentively as I explained the situation. "This is deeply concerning, Catherine," he said. "If they're positioning to challenge your competency, we need to act quickly. I'll start the legal process to evict them, but it will take time. Colorado requires proper notice." Court filings were looking at weeks, possibly months. Months? My voice rose in disbelief. I can't live like this for months. I understand, Daniel said sympathetically. Document everything. Take photos of your property condition, record interactions if legal in your jurisdiction. And Catherine, be careful what you eat and drink there. His warning sent a chill through me. That evening, I noticed Sandra hovering as Melissa prepared dinner. Something about their whispered conversation and quick glances in my direction made me suspicious. When Melissa placed a cup of tea beside me with unusual solicitude, I pretended to drink it while actually emptying it into a nearby plant when no one was looking. Within an hour, I felt validated in my caution. A peculiar drowsiness crept over me despite not consuming the tea. Looking down at my half-eaten dinner, I realized they must have drugged my food as well. Fighting to appear normal, I excused myself and retreated to the guest room, where I forced myself to vomit in the attached bathroom. Even after emptying my stomach, I felt disoriented and sluggish. Through the haze, I heard my bedroom door open. Keeping my eyes nearly closed, I watched through slitted lids as Melissa entered with her phone, taking photos of me in my seemingly incapacitated state. "Perfect," she whispered. "James will definitely believe us now." After she left, I dragged myself to the window, desperate for fresh air to clear my head. That's when I noticed a figure approaching the house, Ted Williams, our neighbor from the property down the road. A retired professor who'd known Robert and me for years, Ted lived here year-round. Mustering my energy, I made my way outside to intercept him before he reached the main door. "Catherine," he exclaimed, clearly surprised by my disheveled appearance. "I heard you were in town. Are you all right?" "You don't look well." "Ted," I began, but my words slurred slightly. "Something's wrong. They're drugging me." His expression shifted from concern to awkward discomfort. "Who's drugging you?" "Melissa told me you've been having some difficulties since Robert passed." My heart sank. They'd already gotten to Ted. "No, listen," I insisted, fighting to articulate clearly. "They moved into my house without permission. They're taking my things, going through my papers. Please, you have to help me." Ted looked uncertainly toward the house, where Sandra now stood in the doorway. "Ted, so good to see you again," she called warmly. "We were just about to have coffee. Would you like to join us?" "Sure, Sandra," he responded, then turned back to me with a patronizing smile. "Why don't we get you inside to rest? You seem tired." As Ted guided me toward the house, I felt utter despair. They had successfully positioned me as confused and unstable. Who would believe me now? Inside, Sandra smoothly explained away my behavior. "Poor Catherine has good days and bad days. The medication helps, but sometimes she gets confused about who's staying where. James is so worried about her." I wanted to scream in frustration, but my tongue felt thick and uncooperative. Then, as Sandra turned to get Ted's coffee, I saw her quickly pocket my cell phone that had been charging on the counter. Ted saw it too. His expression changed subtly, eyes narrowing as he glanced between Sandra and me. Later, as Ted prepared to leave, he managed to catch me alone for a moment on the porch. "I'll be back tomorrow," he whispered, pressing a small object into my palm. "Keep this hidden. Something doesn't add up here." Looking down, I saw he'd given me a prepaid cell phone. That night, as I lay in bed with my door locked, I'd installed a portable travel lock. I heard the distinct sound of someone trying my doorknob. When I checked the next morning, I discovered they'd changed all the exterior locks while I'd been drugged and disoriented. I was now effectively a prisoner in my own home. By my third day in the house, I'd established a routine. I avoided eating anything I hadn't personally prepared, kept the travel lock on my door whenever I was inside the guest room, and documented everything with the prepaid phone Ted had given me. The effects of whatever they'd drugged me with had finally worn off, leaving me clear-headed but deeply disturbed. I was starting to see the full picture. This wasn't a simple case of unwanted house guests. Melissa and her family were executing a carefully orchestrated plan. But to what end? My answer came unexpectedly that afternoon when the crunch of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Looking out the window, My heart leaped. James was here. Surely once he saw the situation firsthand, he'd understand. I rushed outside as he stepped from his car, relief washing over me. James, thank God you're here. My son embraced me, but something felt off. His hug was perfunctory, his expression guarded rather than concerned. Mom, he said, studying my face carefully. You don't look well. Before I could respond, Melissa appeared, her face a perfect mask of worried devotion. James, I'm so glad you came. Your mother's been unpredictable. James kept his arm around me as we entered the house, but I felt it now as restraint rather than support. Inside, Sandra, Ethan, and Brooke were arranged in the living room like a tableau of concerned family members. Son, I said firmly, we need to speak privately. Anything you want to say can be said in front of everyone. Mom, James replied. We're all family here. That phrase again. The same one Sandra had used. Had they been coaching him? Fine, I said, straightening my shoulders. These people have invaded our property, rearranged everything, hidden or possibly stolen valuable items, and last night they drugged my food. James's expression shifted to embarrassment. Mom, nobody drugged you. Melissa told me you've been drinking heavily. They're worried about you mixing alcohol with your grief medications. What? I haven't been drinking at all. As if on cue, Ethan emerged from the guest room, my room holding a paper bag. Found these hidden under her bed. He upended the bag on the coffee table, and several empty liquor bottles tumbled out. I stared in disbelief. Those aren't mine. I've never seen them before. They planted those. James winced at my raised voice. Sandra moved to his side, her hand on his arm. James, this is exactly what we've been dealing with. The paranoia. The accusations. She needs help. I'm not paranoid, I insisted, but even to my own ears, I sounded increasingly desperate. James, you have to believe me. They're manipulating you. They've been systematically going through our financial documents. Mom, James said gently, using the same tone I'd heard him use with his young nephews. You're not making sense. Why would Melissa's family care about your finances? I don't know yet, but she threatened us yesterday, Melissa interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Said she'd have us all thrown out on the street. She called me horrible names, James, in front of everyone. That's a lie. I countered. But Melissa had already buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with apparent sobs. James looked stricken. Mom, how could you? I never said those things. James, they're lying to you. Sandra sighed dramatically. Catherine, dear, perhaps you don't remember. Your outbursts have been concerning. I turned to James, desperate for him to see through their act. Son, please, you know me. Have I ever been cruel or threatening? Have I ever had drinking problems or memory issues? For a moment, doubt flickered across his face. Then Melissa placed her hand on her stomach in a deliberately maternal gesture. James, I'm worried about the stress. Doctor, Harrison said it's not good for the baby. The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick. But I could see it working on my son. His expression hardened as he looked at me. Mom, I think you should come back to New York with me. This environment isn't good for you right now. I'm not leaving my home in the hands of these people. Melissa began to cry harder. Brooke rushed to comfort her while giving me a reproachful look. Ethan stood with arms crossed, smirking slightly. James pulled me aside, lowering his voice. Mom, you're not well. Dad's death hit you harder than you're admitting. These mood swings, the paranoia, the drinking. I am not drinking or paranoid. My frustration made my voice rise, which only seemed to confirm their narrative. Look, James continued, we've been talking. Maybe you need some time with professionals who can help you process your grief. Just for a few weeks. Ice flooded my veins as I realized what he was suggesting. You want to have me committed, based on their lies? It's not like that. It's a wellness center. For rest and therapy. I stepped back from him, seeing my own son as if for the first time. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I'm staying right here. That night, after James had been persuaded to stay in the master bedroom with Melissa, I used Ted's phone to search Melissa's name online. What I found shocked me to my core. A newspaper article from 6 years ago mentioned a Melissa Winters being investigated for elder fraud in Arizona. The charges were eventually dropped, but the details were eerily similar to my situation. Then, I discovered something even more disturbing. In my desk drawer, hidden beneath some papers, I found a draft document for power of attorney with James's name as the appointed agent and Sandra as the witness. They weren't just trying to gaslight me, they were planning to take control of all my assets. The realization made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about a free place to stay. This was about money specifically. The substantial inheritance I'd received after Robert's death. The morning after James's arrival, I pretended to accept a peace offering from Melissa, a cup of tea that I strongly suspected contained more than just chamomile. When no one was looking, I poured it into a travel mug I'd lined with a plastic bag, sealing it for future testing. "I think I'll take this to my room and rest," I told them, playing the role of docile, slightly confused widow they expected. Once alone, I sent a text to Ted from the prepaid phone. "Need your help. Can you come by around noon? Make it seem casual." His reply came quickly. "Will do. Hang tight." With everyone believing I was sedated in my room, I had a rare opportunity to search the house without interference. James had gone into town with Ethan, supposedly to pick up groceries, while Melissa and Sandra were in the backyard, discussing something in hushed tones. I moved silently through my own home, documenting everything with the phone's camera. I photographed the rearranged furniture, the missing valuables, the empty spaces where family photos had been removed. In the study, I discovered Melissa's laptop open but locked. On a hunch, I tried James's birthday as the password nothing. Then I tried their wedding date bingo. The emails I found confirmed my worst fears. Melissa had been researching signs of dementia and contesting competency. She'd been in contact with a lawyer specializing in guardianship cases. Most disturbing was an email exchange with Sandra discussing how to accelerate the timeline now that I had unexpectedly shown up. I quickly forwarded these emails to Ted and to my own attorney before carefully restoring the computer to its previous state. In the master bedroom, I found a notebook tucked between the mattress and box spring. Inside were detailed notes in Sandra's handwriting. Observations about my behavior, twisted accounts of interactions we'd had, and a timeline labeled Catherine's deterioration. They'd been building their case for weeks. Under the bed, I discovered a box containing several of my missing valuables, including Robert's watches and my mother's pearls. I photographed everything before returning it exactly as I'd found it. Around noon, Ted arrived as promised. Sandra greeted him effusively, maintaining the facade of the caring family friend. "Ted, how lovely to see you again. Catherine's resting, I'm afraid. The medications make her so drowsy." "No problem," Ted replied smoothly. "Actually, I brought some of my famous banana bread. Thought it might cheer her up." "How thoughtful. I'll make sure she gets some when she wakes up." While Ted engaged Sandra in conversation, Brooke joined them, seemingly eager for any distraction from the tense household atmosphere. I used their distraction to slip outside and meet Grace, a woman Ted had brought with him who waited in his truck. "Catherine," she asked quietly as I approached. "I'm Grace Winters." The surname struck me immediately. "Any relation to Melissa?" Grace's expression hardened. "Ex-sister-in-law. I was married to her brother Ethan briefly. Ted told me what's happening." It's their usual playbook. Over the next 15 minutes, Grace shared her story. Sandra had orchestrated a similar scheme against Grace's elderly aunt, insinuating themselves into her life before isolating her and gaining control of her finances. They'd only been caught when a bank teller noticed suspicious withdrawals. "The charges didn't stick," Grace explained bitterly. "Sandra's too smart to leave obvious evidence. But I've been tracking them ever since, trying to warn potential victims." "How do they choose their targets?" I asked. "Wealthy widows or widowers, usually with minimal family support. People with valuable assets but potentially strained relationships with their children. Sound familiar?" It did. Since Robert's death, James and I had grown somewhat distant. Not estranged, but not as close as we once were. The perfect vulnerability for them to exploit. "I've been documenting everything," I told her, showing her the photos I'd taken. "But James is completely under their spell." "That's by design," Grace explained. Melissa's job is to keep him distracted and emotionally invested. The pregnancy announcement? Probably fake. They've used that one before. The revelation stunned me. Though on reflection, it made sense. Melissa had never shown any interest in children during the 5 years she'd been married to James. Grace provided me with documentation from their previous schemes, newspaper clippings, court records that had been sealed, but that she'd managed to obtain, statements from other victims. She also gave me the contact information for Diana Carter, a retired detective who specialized in elder fraud cases. Call her, Grace urged. She knows how these people operate. When Ted's visit concluded, I returned to my role as the confused, sedated widow. But inside, my mind was racing with newfound purpose. I wasn't just gathering evidence to convince James anymore, I was building a case. That evening, I made my first strategic move. As everyone gathered for dinner, I casually mentioned that I'd been thinking about my will. Given recent events, I said, pushing food around my plate, I'm considering some changes. Family dynamics aren't what I thought they were. The effect was immediate. James looked hurt, while Melissa and Sandra exchanged alarmed glances. Ethan's perpetual scowl deepened. Mom, this isn't the time to discuss such things, James said uncomfortably. When is the time then? I challenged. After I'm declared incompetent? After decisions are made for me? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I'd struck a nerve. Later, I overheard James and Melissa arguing in hushed tones. What is she talking about changing her will? James demanded. Did you know about this? Of course not, Melissa protested. But it doesn't matter, does it? We're not after her money. The lie was so blatant it would have been comical under other circumstances. The next day, I laid my trap. I created a fake document detailing my assets, making sure to include mentions of offshore accounts and property investments that didn't actually exist. I left it hidden in an obvious location in the guest room, then announced I was going for a walk alone. Instead, I circled back and positioned myself where I could observe through a window. Sure enough, within minutes, Sandra and Ethan entered my room and began searching. When they found the document, their excitement was palpable. Sandra took photos of every page with her phone, while Ethan kept watch. Meanwhile, I had set up the hidden camera Ted had provided, capturing their invasion of privacy and their subsequent discussion about the gold mine they'd discovered. The most damning moment came when Melissa joined them. Is that everything? She asked eagerly. More than we thought, Sandra replied. Once we get control of her accounts, we can transfer the funds gradually. James will never know the full amount. What about James? Melissa asked, looking slightly uncomfortable. You let me worry about your husband, Sandra said dismissively. Just keep him convinced his mother is losing her mind. The power of attorney document is almost ready. And if she keeps fighting us? Ethan asked. Sandra's response chilled me to the bone. Then we moved to Plan B. The medicine can be increased. Accidents happen to confused elderly people all the time. Their entire conversation was captured on video, the smoking gun I desperately needed. But would it be enough to convince James? I had my answer sooner than expected. That evening, Melissa forgot to lock her phone. James, looking for the charger, picked it up just as a message preview appeared on the screen, a text from Sandra referencing the old lady's millions, and once we get guardianship. I wasn't there to witness it, but Ted, who had become my eyes and ears around town, told me later that James had been seen sitting in his car outside the local diner for nearly an hour, his expression devastated as he scrolled through his wife's phone. The pieces of my counterattack were falling into place. Now I just needed to bring everything together before Plan B could be implemented. The atmosphere in the house changed dramatically the morning after James discovered Melissa's texts. Though he hadn't confronted her directly, a strategic decision we'd discussed via Ted's phone, his demeanor toward her had cooled noticeably. He made excuses to avoid being alone with her, and his responses to her attempts at affection were mechanical at best. Melissa, sensing something was wrong but unable to identify the cause, grew increasingly agitated. During breakfast, she knocked over her coffee cup, shattering it on the floor and bursting into tears that seemed disproportionate to the accident. I'm sorry, she sobbed, while Sandra rushed to comfort her. I'm just so emotional with the pregnancy. James's jaw tightened at the mention of the pregnancy, but he said nothing. The shift in dynamics didn't go unnoticed by Sandra and Ethan. I caught them huddled in conversation later that morning, their expressions tense as they glanced repeatedly toward James, who was deliberately occupying himself with yard work outside. Around noon, Ethan cornered me in the hallway, blocking my path to the kitchen. His imposing frame filled the narrow space, forcing me to step back. "Things are changing around here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, keeping my expression neutral despite my racing heart. He leaned closer, his breath hot on my face. "Yes, you do. You've been causing trouble, turning James against Melissa. It stops now." "Or what?" I challenged, refusing to be intimidated despite our significant size difference. His smile was cold. "Accidents happen, Catherine. Especially to women your age. Stairs can be so treacherous. Or maybe you leave the stove on, start a fire. So many possibilities." Before I could respond, James appeared at the end of the hallway. "Everything okay here?" Ethan immediately stepped back, his threatening demeanor replaced by casual nonchalance. "Just checking if Catherine needs anything. She seems confused again." James's eyes narrowed slightly, but he merely nodded and waited for Ethan to leave before approaching me. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," I assured him, though my pulse was still racing from the encounter. "James, we need to talk. Privately." He glanced around nervously. "Not here. Not now. They're watching everything. Tonight," I whispered. "After everyone's asleep. Meet me in the boathouse." He gave an almost imperceptible nod before walking away, his posture deliberately casual. That afternoon, I returned to my room to find it completely ransacked. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor, the mattress upended, and my suitcase contents scattered everywhere. Most alarmingly, the hidden camera and the prepaid phone from Ted were gone. As I stood surveying the damage, Sandra appeared in the doorway. "Oh my," she said with mock concern. "Catherine, did you do this?" "You know I didn't," I replied coldly. She sighed dramatically. "James, come quickly." When my son appeared, she gestured to the chaos. "Look what your mother has done." This is exactly what happened at Melissa's sister's house last week, the paranoid searching, the destruction of property. "I didn't do this," I stated firmly, looking directly at James. "They did it. Looking for evidence I've been collecting." "Evidence of what?" Sandra scoffed. "Your paranoia is getting worse, Catherine." James surveyed the room, his expression unreadable. "Who would do something like this?" "Think about it, James," Sandra urged. "Who has been acting erratically since arriving? Who has been making wild accusations against a family that only wants to help?" Before James could respond, Melissa rushed in, clutching her stomach dramatically. "James," the doctor called with my test results. "He's concerned about the baby's heartbeat. We need to go in tomorrow." The distraction worked. James's attention immediately shifted from the destroyed room to Melissa's supposed medical crisis. As they left, Sandra lingered, a triumphant smile playing at her lips. "You're outmatched, Catherine," she said quietly. "Why not make this easier on yourself? Sign the power of attorney, and we'll make sure you're comfortable in a nice facility." "Never," I replied firmly. Her expression hardened. "Your choice. But remember, we can make it look like your idea." That evening, I found a glass of water beside my bed that I hadn't poured. When I checked, it had the same slightly bitter scent as the drugged tea from before. They were growing bolder, less concerned with subtlety. I pretended to drink it, actually emptying it into the potted plant in my room, then acted increasingly drowsy until finally retiring to bed early. Through slitted eyes, I watched as Sandra checked on me around 10 o'clock, seemingly satisfied that I was unconscious. At midnight, I carefully made my way out to the boathouse, using the pathway illuminated by moonlight reflecting off the lake. James was already waiting, pacing nervously. "Mom," he began, voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what's real anymore." "I know," I said gently. "They've been very convincing. I saw texts on Melissa's phone," he admitted, "about your money, about guardianship. But then she showed me your medical records prescriptions for antipsychotics, therapist notes about paranoid delusions." "Those are forgeries," I explained. They've been building a paper trail to question my competence. Why would she do this? We've been married for 5 years. For the money, James. They've done this before. I explained everything I'd learned from Grace about their pattern of targeting wealthy widows and widowers. And the pregnancy? He asked, his voice breaking slightly. I can't prove it, but according to Grace, it's a tactic they've used before. He sank onto a bench, head in his hands. I've been such a fool. We both were, I said, sitting beside him. They're experts at manipulation. What do we do now? I have a plan, I began, but before I could elaborate, the boathouse door burst open. Ethan stood there, silhouetted against the night, with Sandra and Melissa behind him. Family meeting? Ethan sneered. How touching. You followed me, James accused, standing to face them. Of course we did, Sandra replied smoothly. We're worried about you both. Catherine's delusions are clearly affecting you now, too. Stop it, James said firmly. I know what you're doing. I've seen the texts, heard your conversations. Melissa stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. James, baby, you can't believe her over me. I'm carrying your child. Are you? He challenged. Or is that just another lie? Her face contorted with rage for a split second before she composed herself. How could you say that? After everything we've been through? While they argued, Ethan had been moving steadily closer to me. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the boathouse, steps the steep, wooden stairs that led down to the water. Let her go, James shouted, lunging toward us. Sandra moved with surprising speed, blocking his path. Ethan's just helping her back to the house. She's not stable near the water. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ethan's grip on my arm tightened painfully as he pulled me toward the stairs. I could see the intent in his eyes. This was the accident they had planned. One push, and I would tumble down the steep steps onto the rocky shore below. Mom, James shouted, finally pushing past Sandra. In that instant, I recalled the self-defense class Robert had insisted I take years ago. I went limp suddenly, dropping my weight and throwing Ethan off balance. As he stumbled, I twisted away, but my foot caught on the uneven planking. I fell, but instead of tumbling down the stairs as Ethan had intended, I fell sideways onto the boathouse floor. Pain shot through my wrist as I landed, but adrenaline kept me moving, scrambling away from the stairs. The commotion attracted attention. Lights appeared on the shore. Ted and Diana, the retired detective, had been watching the house as we'd arranged. Their shouts carried across the water as they rushed toward the boathouse. Ethan, realizing they had witnesses, backed away from me. She tripped, he said loudly. I was trying to help her, but the damage was done. James had seen the truth with his own eyes, the deliberate way Ethan had positioned me near the stairs, the calculated violence in his grip. Get away from my mother, James said, his voice deadly quiet. All of you, now. Sandra, always quick to adapt, switched tactics immediately. James, darling, this is all a misunderstanding. We're worried about Catherine's safety. That's all. Stop. James's voice cracked like a whip. I know everything. The fake medical records. The plans for guardianship. The confused widow narrative. It's over. Melissa abandoned all pretense, her face contorting with fury. You idiot. Do you know how long we've been planning this? How careful we've been. And you're throwing it all away because Mommy told you some sob story? Her words hung in the air, the admission damning in its clarity. Sandra closed her eyes briefly, lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure at her daughter's outburst. By then, Ted and Diana had reached the boathouse, accompanied by 2 deputies from the sheriff's office that Diana had convinced to come along based on the evidence we'd gathered. As the deputies separated everyone for questioning, I caught a final glimpse of Sandra's face. There was no remorse there, no shame, only cold calculation as she already began formulating her next move. But this time, we were ready. With the arrival of the sheriff's deputies, the boathouse became a flurry of activity. Everyone was separated for questioning, with James and I sitting on opposite ends of the dock, while the others were escorted back to the main house. My wrist throbbed where I'd fallen, but the pain seemed distant compared to the relief of finally having authorities involved. Diana Carter, the retired detective Grace had connected me with, spoke quietly with the deputies, providing context and background on Sandra's history of similar schemes. Ted brought me a blanket and sat beside me, his steady presence comforting after days of psychological warfare. "You did it, Catherine," he said quietly. "You stood your ground." "Not quite yet," I replied, watching as one of the deputies spoke into his radio. "They're good at this game. Sandra will have a plausible explanation for everything." Indeed, when we were all brought back to the house, Sandra had composed herself completely. She sat at my dining room table, hands folded primly, the picture of a concerned mother-in-law. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," she told Deputy Harris, her voice dripping with sincerity. "Catherine has been struggling since her husband died. We only came to help." "By moving into her house without permission?" Diana interjected. "By drugging her food? By planning an accident on the boathouse stairs?" Sandra's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into concerned sympathy. "These are exactly the kind of paranoid accusations we've been dealing with. There's documentation of Catherine's condition." "Forged documentation," James interrupted firmly. "I've been looking more closely at those medical records. The prescriptions don't match any doctor my mother has ever visited. The therapy notes are from a practice that doesn't exist." Deputy Harris, a veteran officer with a weathered face and skeptical eyes, turned to Sandra. "Ma'am, we have witnesses who heard your daughter admit to planning something regarding Mrs. Reynolds. Can you explain what that meant?" "Melissa was upset," Sandra countered smoothly. "She didn't mean—" "I meant exactly what I said," Melissa interrupted, surprising everyone. She sat on the sofa, apart from the others, her expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. "I'm tired of pretending. This whole thing was Mom's idea anyway." "Melissa!" Sandra hissed, but the damage was done. "Mrs. Reynolds has money. A lot of money," Melissa continued, ignoring her mother's glare. Sandra thought she'd be an easy target grieving widow, somewhat estranged from her son. The perfect mark. The room fell silent. Even Ethan looked shocked at Melissa's sudden candor. "Why are you doing this?" Sandra demanded, her composure finally cracking. Melissa laughed bitterly. "Because I'm pregnant, Mom. Actually pregnant. Not just pretending this time. And I'm not bringing my child into this life, this endless cycle of cons and running." James stared at his wife, conflicted emotions playing across his face. The revelation that the pregnancy was real clearly caught him off guard. Deputy Harris cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I think you'd better continue this conversation down at the station. All of you," he added, looking at Sandra, Ethan, and Brooke. As the deputies began the process of taking them in for questioning, I moved to sit beside James, who looked utterly shell-shocked. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, voice ragged with emotion. "I should have believed you from the start. They're professionals at manipulation," I reminded him gently. "You're not the first person they've fooled. And unfortunately, you won't be the last." "How did you know? How did you see through it when I couldn't?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because they underestimated me. They saw a grieving widow and assumed I was broken. But losing Robert didn't break me. It reminded me how strong I can be." The next few days passed in a blur of statements, evidence collection, and legal consultations. Diana proved invaluable, connecting us with law enforcement officers in other jurisdictions where Sandra had operated. Grace arrived with 3 other victims, willing to testify about similar schemes. Meanwhile, Ted helped me secure the house, changing locks and installing a proper security system. We recovered most of my stolen valuables from Ethan's car and a storage unit they'd rented in town. A week after the confrontation at the boathouse, I sat with James on the deck overlooking the lake. The evening was peaceful, the water reflecting the sunset in shimmers of gold and orange. "Melissa's agreed to testify against her mother and Ethan," James said, breaking the comfortable silence, "in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And the baby?" I asked gently. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's real. Due in January. She wants me to be involved, but no expectations beyond that." "What do you want?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I still can't believe I didn't see what was happening. 5 years of marriage, and I never knew who she really was." "People show us what they want us to see," I said. "Especially people like Sandra, who've turned deception into an art form." The lawyer had explained that Sandra's operation was more sophisticated than we'd initially realized. They targeted wealthy individuals across multiple states, staying just ahead of investigations, using different names and variations of their scheme. They rarely faced consequences because victims were either too embarrassed to come forward or successfully declared incompetent. But this time was different. This time, they'd left a trail of evidence, emails, text messages, forged documents, and most damning of all, Melissa's testimony. "I've been thinking," I said, turning to face James. "What if we use this experience to help others?" "How do you mean?" "Diana mentioned that these scams are increasingly common, but there's little awareness. What if we established a foundation? Education, support for victims, resources to help families recognize the warning signs." James considered this, a spark of interest lighting his eyes for the first time in days, using what happened to us to protect others. "I like that. It would give meaning to all this pain," I said. "And it would honor your father's memory. He always believed in turning hardship into purpose." As night fell over the lake, we continued talking, planning, healing. The house that had been a battleground began to feel like a sanctuary again. I knew there was still a long road ahead: legal proceedings, James's complex feelings about Melissa and their child, my own recovery from the psychological trauma of being gaslit and threatened in my own home. But for the first time since arriving to find strangers in my house, I felt a sense of peace. They had tried to break me, to erase me, to rewrite my story to serve their purposes. They had failed. In fighting back, I had rediscovered parts of myself I thought had died with Robert: my resilience, my clarity, my strength. As the first stars appeared above the mountains, I made a silent promise to use that strength not just for myself, but for others who might find themselves targeted by predators like Sandra. This wasn't just my victory, it would become something larger. The house was quiet now, free of intruders and threats. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, I was simply Catherine Reynolds, reclaiming her life one peaceful moment at a time. 2 weeks after the arrest of Sandra, Ethan, and Brooke, I found myself sitting in a conference room at the district attorney's office. The walls were a sterile beige, the fluorescent lighting harsh on my tired eyes. Across from me sat Assistant District Attorney Valerie Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense manner that I found immediately reassuring. "Mrs. Reynolds," she began, shuffling through the substantial file before her, "the evidence you've provided is compelling. The emails, the forged medical records, the witness testimonies, it's one of the most comprehensive cases against elder fraud I've seen." "We were thorough," I acknowledged, thinking of the countless hours Diana, Ted, Grace, and I had spent documenting everything. "That thoroughness is why I wanted to meet with you today." She leaned forward slightly. "Sandra Williams or Sandra Miller or Sandra Johnson, depending on which identity she was using at the time, has managed to evade serious consequences for years. We have evidence linking her to at least 7 similar schemes across 4 states. And yet she's never served time," I noted. "Exactly. She's a master at manipulation. Even in the courtroom. She plays the concerned caretaker so convincingly that juries hesitate to convict." Martinez tapped her pen against the file. "That's why Melissa's testimony is crucial. Without it, we risk another near miss." "Is Melissa's cooperation secure?" James asked from beside me. He'd been mostly silent during the meeting, still processing the dual betrayals of his wife and his own judgment. "For now," Martinez replied cautiously. "But Sandra has been reaching out to her through various channels. We've intercepted letters, messages through other inmates. She's pressuring Melissa, using the pregnancy, trying to re-establish control." "And Ethan?" I asked, remembering his threatening presence, the casual violence in his grip as he'd pulled me toward the stairs. "He's a flight risk. We've denied bail, but he has connections. If he disappears, a significant portion of our case weakens." She closed the file decisively, which brings me to my request. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. Melissa has agreed to testify, but given Sandra's manipulative abilities, we need to ensure everything is absolutely airtight. The preliminary hearing was more crowded than I'd expected. Word had spread about the case, drawing attention from advocacy groups focused on elder abuse. Several of Sandra's previous victims had come forward after news reports detailed the arrests, creating a momentum that the media had dubbed the Reynolds Reckoning. As I took my seat in the courtroom, I caught sight of Sandra being led in, her hands cuffed before her. Gone was the elegant, commanding woman who had invaded my home. In her place was someone smaller somehow, dressed in a bland prison jumpsuit that did nothing for her complexion. Yet when her eyes met mine across the room, I still felt a chill at their calculating coldness. Ethan followed, his imposing frame now hunched defensively. Brooke came last, looking terrified and much younger than her 26 years. James tensed beside me as Melissa was brought in separately. Her pregnancy was more visible now, her prison-issued clothing stretched tight across her expanding belly. She didn't look at anyone, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. The hearing proceeded methodically, with the prosecution presenting the substantial evidence we'd gathered. Emails detailing their plans to gain guardianship over me. Financial records showing previous victims' accounts being drained after Sandra and her family insinuated themselves into their lives. The forged medical records created to make me appear incompetent. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and confidently, detailing how they had invaded my home, isolated me, drugged me, and systematically attempted to destroy my credibility with my own son. Mrs. Reynolds, the defense attorney asked during cross-examination, "Isn't it possible that in your grief over your husband's death, you misinterpreted genuine concern as something sinister?" "No," I replied firmly. "There's nothing concerned about drugging someone's food, falsifying medical records, or attempting to push them down a flight of stairs." Sandra's expression remained impassive, but I saw her hands clench slightly on the table before her. The most dramatic moment came when Melissa took the stand. As part of her plea agreement, she had agreed to detail the entire operation, from how they selected targets to how they executed their schemes. "We looked for wealth, of course," she explained, her voice barely audible at first. "But more importantly, we looked for vulnerability, recent widows or widowers, strained family relationships, people who might be lonely or seeking connection." "And Mrs. Reynolds fit this profile?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes. When I married James, Sandra immediately identified Catherine as a potential target." She stumbled over the word, glancing momentarily at James before continuing. But the timing wasn't right. Robert was still alive, and they were too connected to their social circles. What changed? When Robert died, Catherine became isolated. Her relationship with James was strained by grief. Sandra said it was the perfect opportunity. Melissa's voice strengthened slightly. The plan was for me to maintain control over James while Sandra, Ethan, and Brooke established themselves in Catherine's life. Eventually, we would have her declared incompetent, with James as her guardian. Then we could access her accounts, liquidate assets gradually. And if Mrs. Reynolds had not unexpectedly arrived at the house, the plan would have proceeded more slowly. We were building a paper trail of concerning behavior. Eventually, we would have suggested Catherine needed specialized care, a facility where we could control access and continue the narrative of her declining mental state. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sandra remained stone-faced, but Ethan glared at Melissa with undisguised hatred. "Miss Winters," the prosecutor continued, using Melissa's birth name rather than her married one, "were there contingency plans if Mrs. Reynolds resisted?" Melissa hesitated, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "Yes. If necessary, they planned to accelerate her decline. Increased medication, perhaps an accident." The coldness of it sent a ripple through the gallery. Even the judge seemed taken aback, making a note on his pad. The defense attorney attempted to paint Melissa as an unreliable witness, suggesting she was testifying against her family only to secure a lighter sentence for herself. But the damage was done. Combined with the physical evidence and supporting testimonies from previous victims, Sandra's careful facade began to crumble. When the judge ruled that there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Sandra, Ethan, and Brooke were remanded to custody without bail, classified as flight risks and dangers to the community. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, shouting questions about the case that had captured public attention. Diana fielded most of the inquiries, directing them to resources for those concerned about elder fraud while James and I slipped away to a quiet diner several blocks from the courthouse. "She never loved me," James said quietly once we were seated in a corner booth. 5 years of marriage, and it was all an act, a means to an end. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I can't imagine how that feels." He shook his head slowly. "The thing is, I think part of me knew. There were moments when her mask would slip little inconsistencies, reactions that didn't quite fit, but I ignored them because the alternative was too painful to consider. We see what we want to see," I reminded him gently, "especially with the people we love." "What happens now?" he asked. "With the foundation idea we discussed?" "Now it becomes real," I said firmly. "I've already spoken with my attorney about establishing the nonprofit. Diana is on board to develop educational materials. And Grace has connections with victim advocacy groups across the country." A tentative smile crossed James's face. "Dad would be proud. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. I didn't fully understand that until now." As we finished our meal, my phone chimed with a message from Martinez. "Melissa requesting meeting with both of you. Says there's more you need to know. Your decision." I showed the text to James, watching his expression carefully. After a moment of internal struggle, he nodded. "I think we should hear what she has to say." The meeting took place the following day in a small conference room at the detention center. Melissa looked worn, the bravado she'd shown in court replaced by a quiet resignation. "Thank you for coming," she began, hands folded protectively over her belly. "I know I have no right to ask anything of either of you." "Why did you want to see us?" James asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Because you deserve the whole truth," she replied. "And because—" she hesitated. "Because despite everything, this baby deserves a chance at a better life than I had." Over the next hour, Melissa revealed the full extent of Sandra's operation, a multi-generational legacy of cons and manipulations. Sandra had been raised by a mother who used similar tactics, targeting vulnerable individuals for financial gain. She had trained her children from an early age, teaching them to view others as marks rather than people. "It was all I knew," Melissa explained, though it sounded like explanation rather than excuse. "Every relationship was transactional. Every interaction had an angle. Until I met you, James." He remained silent, his expression guarded. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I don't deserve it. But I am asking for a chance to break the cycle." She looked down at her stomach. This child shouldn't grow up learning to see people as targets. Shouldn't learn that love is just another tool for manipulation. "What are you saying?" James asked quietly. "I'm saying I want this child to know something real. Even if that's just knowing their father chose to be in their life despite what their mother did." She took a deep breath. "And I want to make amends however I can. There are other operations like Sandra's. Other families doing what we did. I can help stop them." I studied her carefully, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd come to recognize. But all I saw was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Why should we believe you?" I asked directly. "You shouldn't, not yet," she acknowledged. "I've lied to both of you for years, but I'm willing to prove it, day by day, by continuing to cooperate with the investigation, by testifying against Sandra and Ethan, by accepting whatever consequences come my way." As we left the detention center, James was quiet, processing Melissa's revelations and request. "Do you think she's sincere?" he finally asked as we reached the car. I considered the question carefully. "I think she might be. People can change when they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Whether that change is lasting." I shrugged. "That remains to be seen." "And the baby?" he asked, the question that had clearly been weighing on him most heavily. "That's your decision," I told him gently. "But whatever you choose, I'll support you." He nodded, a resolved expression settling over his features. "I won't abandon my child. I can't trust Melissa, but that baby deserves better than to be born into a family legacy of lies." As we drove away from the detention center, I reflected on how far we'd come in just a few short weeks. From the shock of finding strangers in my home to the systematic dismantling of their elaborate scheme. From nearly being declared incompetent to helping build a case that might finally bring Sandra to justice. The road ahead was still long. The trial would be grueling. James had difficult decisions to make about his future and his role in his child's life. And I was still processing my own trauma from being gaslit and threatened in my own home. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something that had been missing since Robert's death. Purpose. In fighting back against those who had tried to erase me, I had rediscovered my own voice and found a way to use it for others who might otherwise be silenced. 1 year after I drove up to my mountain house and discovered Melissa's family living there, I sat on the deck overlooking the lake, a cup of tea warming my hands against the crisp autumn air. The aspen trees had turned golden, their leaves trembling in the breeze like thousands of shimmering coins. So much had changed in those 12 months. Sandra, Ethan, and Brooke had all been convicted, Sandra and Ethan receiving substantial prison sentences for fraud, elder abuse, and attempted murder, while Brooke, who had cooperated after her initial arrest, was serving a shorter sentence with mandatory counseling. Melissa had followed through on her promise to testify, providing crucial evidence that connected their activities across multiple states. She'd given birth to a healthy baby boy 4 months ago, James Robert Reynolds, named in a gesture of reconciliation that had surprised us all. James had decided to remain involved in his son's life, though his marriage to Melissa was over. He visited the minimum security facility where she was serving her reduced sentence regularly, bringing the baby for supervised visits. It was a complex arrangement, fraught with emotional challenges, but he was committed to giving his son what Melissa had lacked, a chance to grow up with love uncomplicated by manipulation. As for me, the mountain house had been fully restored, all traces of the invasion removed. Ted had helped me install a state-of-the-art security system, though I found I needed it less for peace of mind these days. The fear that had initially lingered after the ordeal had gradually given way to a renewed sense of confidence in my own judgment and resilience. The Reynolds Foundation for Elder Protection was now a reality, with offices in Denver and expanding programs in 3 states. Diana had joined full-time after retiring from consulting, bringing her expertise in identifying and preventing elder fraud. Grace coordinated our victim support services, creating the kind of resource network she'd wished for when dealing with her aunt's case. James and I had used the foundation as a way to rebuild our relationship, working together to create something positive from our experience. The distance that had grown between us after Robert's death had closed, replaced by a deeper understanding and respect for each other. My phone chimed with a text message from Ted, who had become more than just a neighbor in the past year. "Still on for dinner? Bringing that wine you liked last time?" I smiled as I typed my reply. At 58, I hadn't expected to find companionship again after Robert, but Ted's steady presence during the darkest period of my life had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. We were taking it slowly, both carrying our own histories. But the possibility of a future together added an unexpected brightness to my days. As I set my phone down, I noticed a car approaching on the winding driveway, Diana arriving for our weekend strategy session. The foundation was preparing to launch a new educational program targeting financial institutions, training bank employees to recognize the warning signs of elder fraud. While waiting for her to park, I reflected on the lessons of the past year, painful but valuable insights that had reshaped my understanding of both vulnerability and strength. I'd learned that predators don't always look threatening. Sometimes they appear as the concerned family member, the helpful neighbor, the caring friend. I discovered that isolation is their most powerful weapon, and connection the strongest defense. Most importantly, I'd realized that surviving trauma isn't just about endurance, it's about transformation. Using my experience to protect others hadn't just helped them, it had healed something in me as well. Diana waved as she approached the deck, a folder of materials tucked under her arm. "Beautiful day," she commented, settling into the chair beside me. "It is," I agreed, looking out over the lake that had witnessed both my deepest despair and my gradual renewal. "I've been thinking about your suggestion for the conference next month," Diana said, opening her folder. "Having actual survivors speak about their experiences could be powerful." "I'd like to be one of those speakers," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "I think I'm ready to tell my story publicly." Diana studied me with approval. "You know, when we first met, you were fighting to reclaim your voice. Now you're using it to make sure others never lose theirs. That's quite a journey." That evening, after a productive planning session and a lovely dinner with Ted, I stood alone by the lake, watching moonlight ripple across the water. Robert would have been proud of what I'd accomplished this past year. Proud, but not surprised. He had always seen a strength in me that I sometimes forgot was there. "I wish you could see this," I whispered to his memory. "The foundation, James and his son, all of it." The gentle breeze seemed to whisper back, carrying the rustle of aspen leaves and the distant call of a night bird. In that peaceful moment, I felt a sense of completion, not of my life's journey, which still held new chapters to be written, but of the particular dark passage that had begun when I'd opened my front door to find strangers in my home. That house was truly mine again. Not just the physical structure, but the sanctuary it represented. I had reclaimed it, just as I had reclaimed my voice, my autonomy, my future. As I turned to walk back up the path, I thought of the thousands of others still fighting their own battles against those who would erase or exploit them. The work of the foundation had only just begun, but already we were seeing results, cases identified and stopped before they progressed, victims connected with resources, financial institutions implementing new protective measures. From violation to vindication, from victim to advocate, my unexpected journey had come full circle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges with the foundation, new developments in the complex family dynamics with James and his son, new possibilities with Ted. But tonight, in the quiet beauty of the mountains that had witnessed both my darkest moments and my remarkable recovery, I felt ready for whatever came next. Have you ever had to reclaim a part of your life that someone tried to take from you? How did you find the strength to stand your ground? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that sharing our experiences not only helps others feel less alone, but also creates a community of support and vigilance against those who would prey on vulnerability. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to join our community of survivors and supporters, and share with someone who might need to hear this message of resilience. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, trust your instincts, value your voice, and never underestimate your capacity to rise again, stronger than before.